Well, I just finished talking about the MMPI-2, and what I would tell you is that in 2023, the MMPI-3 was published. It looks like this. Uh, the original MMPI had 556 items, and then when the MMPI-2 came out, it had 557 items. Some of those items were repeated in the test. For example, let's just say a question is, sometimes I see and hear things around me that other people don't. True or false. Well, then later on, the same item would come up. And, part of the validity scales were, did you answer the question one way the one time, and then later in the test answer it a different way? So, the original MMPI was put together in 1943, and I previously talked about some of the problems with it, and mainly that it was standardized on people in Minnesota. And so, how then do you give the test to people in other places? And of course, in 1989, the MMPI-2 was published, and I went to some workshops all about it in New Orleans not long after that. I got educated, if you will, by the psychologists who did the revision of the test. So that was quite interesting. In 2008, they came out with a MMPI-2 revised form. And this was done by some of the people who had revised the MMPI-2 originally. The original MMPI we also used with adolescents that were age 16 and over. And when the MMPI-2 came out, they eventually came out with an MMPI-A version, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory adolescent version, which was briefer. Not very many adolescents are willing to answer 557 questions. Although some of the problems I had in giving the MMPI-2, make that the MMPI-A, to adolescents is they like to goof around and intentionally answer items as true that for them weren't really true, or false for them that really weren't false. Sometimes they would even try to make designs out of the bubbles that you fill in, and of course that would invalidate the results totally. So there's always issues in giving these kinds of tests to adolescents. So when the MMPI-3 came out, things drastically changed. Suddenly there weren't just 3 validity scales. Remember I mentioned before with the MMPI-2, there was the lie scale, the fake good scale, and the fake bad scale. With the MMPI-3, there are actually 10 validity scales. Consequently, it's probably more valid. Another thing that happened with the MMPI-3 is, instead of having the clinical scales, they came up with what they call specific problem scales. And these specific problem scales included things like, for some of the validity scales, for instance, they had the uncommon virtues scale. Oh, I never think about anything bad, and things like that. Oh, I never think about swearing, and so on. Uncommon virtues, um, infrequent somatic responses, infrequent psychopathology responses, and so on. But then the specific problem scales, rather than just have depression and social introversion and things like that, they have things like demoralization, somatic complaints, low positive emotions, antisocial behavior. This is a term, by the way, that I'll be talking about when we discuss psychological disorders. This is a term that lay people use incorrectly all the time. They'll say so-and-so is antisocial. Well, and they say that because they haven't been friendly towards them or something like that. That's not what antisocial means. In psychiatric terms, antisocial basically means you're a criminal. You violate society's norms. You're a professional thief or drug dealer or something like that. Just because one of your friends is ignoring you doesn't mean they're being antisocial, okay? So antisocial behavior means that, the person's failing to conform to societal norms and expectations and things like that. There's a scale called ideas of persecution. There are a scale they call aberrant experiences. This includes things like unrealistic thinking, thought disorganization, and things like that. The MMPI-2 had the hypomania scale, and now there's a scale called hypomanic activation. And so these are people that are restless and easily bored, and they have poor impulse control, and they tend to be risk takers and things like that. There's a neurological complaint scale. There are cognitive complaints on one scale. There are suicide and death ideation on one of the scales. There's stress, there's worry, anxiety-related experiences, family problems, substance abuse, aggression, cynicism, dominance, self-importance, and it goes on and on. So, it's not just 9 clinical scales that you're looking for elevations on, but there's, altogether there's 52 scales on the MMPI-3. So it's a much more comprehensive test. Another thing I'd tell you about the MMPI-3, and I'm not sure if I mentioned that where I learned all the details of all this, was I attended a workshop that was sponsored by the Dallas Psychological Association. And we were thoroughly versed on everything about the MMPI-3, how it was put together, how to administer it and interpret it, and so on. A really good thing about it is that they, first of all, greatly reduced the number of items on the test. It now has 335 items rather than 557. And they got rid of all those duplicate items that had been on previous versions of the test. Of those 335 items, 220 are straight out of the original MMPI. Then many of them have been rewritten into more modern language that anyone would understand. And then, of course, there have been new items that have been introduced as well. The norms for the test have also been greatly revised. For example, various regions of the country were used to standardize the test. And I am happy to report that a rather large sample of individuals the test was standardized on came from Dallas. There's a Spanish version of the MMPI-3, and one of the main cities that was used to develop the Spanish version was Dallas, as well as Miami, San Diego, and Washington, D.C. So the MMPI-3 really is drastically different from previous versions of the test. What I've learned is that most psychologists are still administering the MMPI-2. They have yet to establish some of the more specific norms for the MMPI-3 for those high-stress occupations that I mentioned when I was discussing the MMPI-2. And so it's really not being used very much yet. You know, at the workshop I attended, I got to see some sample profiles, and we practiced interpreting them and all that sort of thing. I went ahead and took the MMPI-3 myself just to see what it was like. And what I'll tell you about my own profile is I don't have any elevated scales on anything. From a psychopathology viewpoint, I'm a pretty dull character. That was a relief to discover, and I took it as honestly as I possibly could. You know, I didn't try to create I'm psychopathology-free profile or anything like that. I answered it quite honestly, and I have no elevations on anything. That's the good news. Bad news is your professor is one boring guy. That's all I can say. Well, I just wanted to update you on the MMPI-3. Your textbook author has not even mentioned it in the latest edition. In fact, when our current edition came out, the MMPI-3 hadn't come out yet. So, you know, this is cutting edge stuff that I'm exposing you to. Have a good day.